Arcs are an absolutely integral structural aspect of good storytelling. They are the individual journeys we undertake with the characters, marked by an introduction, complications, and in the case of One Piece, a climactic conclusion. Of course, not all arcs are created equally, and some are certainly better than others for a wide variety of reasons. So today, we are going to be looking at the arcs that failed to meet our expectations, but I want to be clear, worst does not necessarily mean bad. I still very much enjoy most of the arcs on this list, but even in a group of amazing stories, there is going to be a best, and there is going to be a worst. So the criteria for this list is as follows. We are examining arcs as they appear in the manga, so very importantly for this list that means no anime-only filler arcs. In addition, the arcs will be examined both in context of reading them as weekly chapters and by reading them in bulk. So with that out of the way, let's begin. Welcome to the top 5 worst arcs in One Piece. Number 5. Drum Island. Okay, so before I start to get all of the hate in the world, I want to be clear. The Drum Island arc has one of the best told stories in the entire series, being Chopper's flashback. Everything about that portion of it is gut-wrenchingly perfect. But when you step back from that flashback and look at Drum as a whole, it's not all that special compared to the majority of One Piece arcs. The setting of a winter island is quite cool, but it affords Oda very little opportunity to construct an aesthetically detailed island. Instead, it more often than not just gets overcome with a bombardment of white snow. And the villain, well, he's definitely one of the worst in the entire series. Wapol isn't threatening even for a second, and from the moment he appears, you are just counting down to his defeat, so that we can move on to a better villain like, say Sir Crocodile, who we'd been building up for several arcs at this point. And that brings up another issue. The Drum Island arc broke the flow of the Alabasta saga. Up until this point, we'd been building up the threat of Baroque works and the urgency to get Vivi back to her country, but then we eventually took a side stop. Luckily for Drum, like I said before, it has one of the best crafted flashbacks in the entire series, so it works very well as an isolated story. But in terms of arcs, I can honestly say that I enjoyed all but 4 of them more than Drum. Number 4. Fishman Island. So a common trend of the picks on this list is going to be the presence of a terrible main antagonist. And I think it's fair to say that Fishman Island has the worst main villain in the entirety of One Piece. Hody Jones is so awful that he made an otherwise interesting setting incredibly slow and tedious. But doth a bad villain make a bad arc? I'd argue not necessarily. In fact, I think Fishman Island itself fell victim to a much bigger factor, which put simply is hype. Fishman Island was this far-off place that we'd been hearing about ever since East Blue, so the anticipation of finally getting there was absolutely huge. I mean, its existence had been dropped into the series casually many times, so the fanbase was imagining that Oda would have big plans for something epic to take place there. As it turns out, not quite. At least not this time around. It's implied somewhat that Luffy will need to return to Fishman Island at some stage, but this first visit was a bit of a dud. I will say that it held my interest quite strongly though, mainly because it was the first arc we'd seen post-time skip. So we were still learning all about the Straw Hats and their new techniques and personalities. It was a fun time actually, but looking back on it, it certainly wasn't a high point compared to the rest of the series. Number 3. Thriller Bark. So I think most of you saw this coming. Thriller Bark is a nice niche arc, I guess, but it was a definite dip in the quality of One Piece that we'd come to expect. To be fair, Thriller Bark had a tough act to follow. It came right after Enies Lobby, and so it was never going to be able to match up to that. However, I didn't expect it to be quite as disappointing as it was. And once more, a lot of this is down to a terrible main antagonist, but let's be honest, the villains in general were terrible during this arc, except for maybe Perona. And the arc did have a lot of cool moments like the Straw Hats teaming up against Oars, Nightmare Luffy, and anything to do with Bartholomew Kuma, but in the end, they were just moments, scattered within a so-so arc. And sadly, for the first time since I'd started reading One Piece, it got really difficult to read week to week, and I seriously considered taking a few months away just to read the chapters in bulk. Of course, I didn't end up doing that, but this arc made me seriously consider it. Number 2. Long Ring, Long Land. Alright, a disclaimer here. I love Foxy, I think he's hilarious, and I had a fantastic time during this arc. The issue is that as much as I loved it, it really is an arc of pure comedy and not much else of substance. So it's funny, it's really funny, but I expect more than that because One Piece is so much more than just a simple gag series. In addition to that, the island itself is pretty one note. Everything is tall, cool. Other than that, pretty sparse and visually uninteresting. The best part about this arc is its ending, where we meet Aokiji for the first time, but that really speaks to the potential of future arcs rather than the quality of this one. And yeah, it has Afro Luffy, but I'm afraid not even his enhanced powers can save this from being one of the worst arcs in the series. Still highly enjoyable, but I'm afraid that with nothing but comedy, just doesn't stand up to the large majority of arcs in One Piece. Number 1. Syrup Village. Stepping way back into the era of East Blue, we're going to shine an unfortunate spotlight onto Usopp's introduction into the series. At this point, One Piece was ever so young, but exceptionally promising, featuring a young boy with cool powers, a badass swordsman, and a sassy navigator/thief. So, when we all set off to recruit the next member of this amazing crew, I think we all expected a bit more than Usopp. His initial design was strenuous on the eyes, his cowardly personality not so likable, and his weapon of choice was a fairly lame slingshot. To be clear, I love Usopp, but it took me until around Alabasta to get there. At this point in the story, this kid had no business being here for me. The island itself was fairly boring, your stock standard peaceful East Blue stuff, and the enemies were fairly disappointing as well. Well, except for Django, I quite like him. And Syrup Village suffers a lot more in retrospect, because you know the amazingness that is just around the corner with Baratie onwards. But you have to slog through this arc first. And all in all, it's just a pretty lame arc, and I would say the worst in the series. And that pretty much does it for the top 5 worst arcs in One Piece. I want to stress again that worst does not necessarily mean bad, but these are definitely the arcs I enjoyed least in the series. And if you just so happen to enjoy this video, then feel free to like, favorite, or subscribe, and please do comment with your personal picks for the top 5 worst arcs in One Piece. This has been the Grand Line Review, and I'll see you next time.